Well, welcome back to the Garden Experience podcast. For those who have been listening, or for those of you who are new, we just want to welcome you again. This is our 10th episode of the Garden Experience podcast. How has both of your guys' experiences been with the podcast?
It's been interesting having to recall what we talked about the previous week. That's my biggest struggle. Even if I do listen to the podcast like the day before, I just, there's so much going on. Like when we play at churches on the weekend, whatever, like my brain kind of swaps modes. And then when it's time to record the next week's episode, I'm already like, I totally forgot what we just talked about. But other than that, like it's been really great having to going through and like processing a lot of my encounters with God and my thoughts.
How has it been to hear your own voice?
That's the challenge. Yeah,
that's why sometimes I don't listen to the podcast after the first like check.
Yeah. And I mean that's probably one of my challenges too, is like hearing yourself in your own voice, especially when going back and like editing. I'm just like, even like your thoughts. Sometimes you're like, maybe I wish I would have said that different or a little bit better, or it sounded weird the way I said that. But I mean, even just the challenge of like, because the Garden Experience podcast, for those of you who are maybe new, it's just, we're just inviting you into the conversations that we have every week, day by day, week by week, meeting by meeting. And so we're super open and vulnerable, and we're also just learning too. So I think one of my challenges was like processing things as we talk about them too. And it's sometimes when you put a mic in front of your face and you're like, oh, we're being recorded, sometimes you like mess up your thoughts, or there's the idea of the mic being in front of your face can be a distraction to cause you to stumble on your words. But that's just the challenge of it.
And this is unscripted too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it's our natural conversation.
Yeah.
We have a topic that we're talking and then we're just thinking it through.
Exactly. So is that, what about you? What's your
it's
experience?
been it's been great to hear both of you open up your hearts and share what's inside. On my end, I listen to them from beginning to end, but Casey sends it to us normally on Friday, but I wait till Monday when they premiere, because then I can play them at 1.5 speed, which is what I listen to my podcast on everything, which my speaking sounds so fast. At 1.5, it's like, it's so crazy. But I just listen to every podcast that way. It's just easier for me. But the biggest thing for me has been like going back and saying like, I wish I would have said it this way rather than that way. Like I was telling my wife last week, I was listening to the podcast on the heart, I think it was, or something like that. Or something like that, one of the podcasts. And I was like, man, I mispronounce a word I normally don't mispronounce. Like, like it's like in the moment, because I'm thinking, I was thinking of when Jesus hung on the cross, or as he was hanging on the cross. So instead of saying hung or hanging, I say hunging.
Nice.
I'm like, in one point, I used a singular expression instead of using the plural one, which I needed to be. Like, I used expresses instead of express. I'm like, I don't even know. Like, and she's like, I know you never. She's like, Shirley's like, you normally don't make those mistakes. What's going on with you? I'm like, it's just that it's in the moment. And then the worst one was when I was talking. It was like this really deep moment where I was talking about how Jesus, the Father, the Holy Spirit, the Triune God has His eyes on you, and how far Jesus came for you. And I meant to say for, but I said how far Jesus came from you.
Nice.
And I was like, oh man. And she's like, how do you say from instead of for? And I was like, well, it's because in my mind I was doing this massive editing of like, there's this Karl Barth, is a theologian, and he has this segment on Jesus' incarnation, that Jesus comes from a faraway land in order to bring you to the land that God has for you. So in my mind, I was like, Jesus came from a far away, but I'm editing it in the moment to try to make it shorter. So it was like, it's like Jesus came so far for you, but it's like so far from you. No!
Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's part of the authentic conversation. Things like that happen. Because like you said, we are processing it in the moment, which is really good.
But honestly, it's been really good to hear how much wisdom has come out from each of us. Some of the things that we say that like need to go back and really rethink and say like, okay, how do we continue to actually explore this down the line? And how do we just not let it be a thought, but really something that deepens us and shapes us. So that's been really cool. And of course, I learned like sometimes I interrupt a lot.
No, it's good. You bring great thoughts, though. I'm so glad that we've done this and that we've challenged ourselves with this. And so, that's our desire too, is just to, that this podcast would benefit, and benefit you, impact you, also challenge you in some ways too, because we want to help you grow into who God's calling you to be. But we're excited about this week's podcast. Before we jump in, I also just want to share about Thursday. It'll be past Thursday, our last garden experience, when you're listening to this, but we want to invite you to the next one, which will be
September 22nd.
22nd. And so, again, Thursday. So we're doing our garden experience gatherings bi-weekly now, on Thursdays. And so, if you're in San Diego, if you're not in San Diego and you want to join us, come join us. If you're in San Diego, we invite you to join us. DM us on Instagram for information and details. And then, also, which will be, Monday when you're listening to this after our September 8th gathering, we'll have uploaded the message on the Garden Experience collection. So if you're not near us and you want to experience part of the Garden Experience, just go to the Garden Experience collection on Spotify or Apple Podcasts to listen to the message that was preached and heard that night. And so, lots of awesome things happening. But this week we want to jump into a continuation of our conversation. If you didn't listen to last week's podcast, which was called It Is Coming, encourage you to go back and listen to it. We jumped into, I'll kind of just give a brief overview of what we talked about, which really the conversation came from, like I said last week, at our prayer gathering in August, at the end of August. I got a word from God that was, the phrase from God was, "It is coming," which was really timely because, I'm in a season of waiting. I think we all are kind of in a season of waiting as we plan to prepare for the launch of our church. And so I got this word from God and connected it with scripture, one of my life verses, which comes from Habakkuk 2:2, which I'll go ahead and read for us too. But we basically, we talked about what it's like, even in Habakkuk, we saw his response as, Habakkuk, this was a conversation.
It'll be Habakkuk.
Habakkuk. Okay, yeah.
I know it plays in my mind so badly. These Hebrew names are like...
Yeah. Well, Habakkuk, I'm going to screw it up a million times, but...
keep saying it the way you were saying it.
Yeah. But, this in Habakkuk really is just a conversation that he's having with God. And at the beginning of Habakkuk, we see him, lamenting and bringing complaints to the Lord about the evil that's around him that he's experiencing. And he's asking God, I cry, and why aren't you answering my cry? And then we see God's divine response, saying that, I'll even read it. I'll go back. We're going back. I'll go to Habakkuk 2:2, but I'm going back to 1:5, which says, "Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed." This is God's response to Habakkuk, his laments and his complaints. He says, "Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told." And really this was connected to the word that God gave me, "It is coming," that, in my life, my own journey, a lot of the time I'm, the things that God does for me really exceed what my expectations are for myself and what I believe is actually possible for myself. And this really just reassured me that God is much bigger than, the things I'm experiencing, the things I'm feeling, what's actually happening before me, even if they're good things too. I could feel like God's being super generous to me and I'm like, man, this is amazing. Or, things are going so well, yet God will still always exceed that. He'll go beyond that. He wants to take you from glory to glory. And so, we see in Habakkuk 1, as it reads on, God talks about the Babylonians, which brought up a great point last week, Armando, how God will use your enemies for his good, for your benefit.
To accomplish his plan in your own life.
Which is amazing. Yeah. Again, and just another reassurance of how big our God is and how he uses anything for his good. He'll use anything and everything for his will.
Nothing is out of his control.
Yep.
Nothing is out of his plan for your life. That's like a really deep sense of security once we start understanding that reality. If God is able to use even my enemies for my good, then it means that everything in my life that he's allowing There's an intention for it.
Yeah.
I in our conversation prior to this, I said like, this is a statement that might not make it into my message.
Yeah.
But it was like the aspect of like God is sustaining us. God sustains every single human being. Christ sustains us. This is what Hebrews 1:3 tells us. And I was telling you guys, like, if sometimes in the message is about power. We're talking about power beyond measure is my title right now. Power beyond measure. Behold your God, power beyond measure. Like he's a creator God. He created the whole universe, created the whole world. Yet he also took on flesh in the person of Christ, in the second person of the Trinity. So all of a sudden, these powers control, but these powers cannot be controlled in other ways. So he calms the storm. He's the one that's sustaining the world as the second person of the Trinity. So it's really interesting dynamic. And I was like, if he's sustaining you and he promises, Jesus says that no hair on your head will be harmed by those who are trying to persecute you. If he sustained you and you're alive, if you have breath in your lungs, it's because he has a plan for your life.
That's right.
So he's protecting you for purpose.
Yep.
So going back to your enemies, like they cannot touch you. God is allowing them in your life to prepare you for purpose. All of a sudden you start realizing like, okay, everything in my life is not just aimless or meaningless or just happen because crap happens. It's like God is allowing it for a greater good. So I just have to turn my eyes to him and not say, why? And say, what are you doing? And what do you want me to do? Because that's a response of trust. Why? Exactly. It's like, I can't trust you. So why are you doing this in my life? And sometimes we have to cry why first, right? We have to cry why to get to the what. Like, why is this happening to me? What have I done? But we have to avoid the why. And I'm getting really off on a different tangent. We have to avoid the why of like, have you heard this? Why it's happening to me? Because I must be a sinner. Like, God must be punishing me. Have you heard that before? Like, have you ever said it yourself? Like, if you don't mind me asking.
Maybe, yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. I know I have. Like, I must be a bad person. And like early on, before I understood what I actually believe, it was a very common thing. Like I heard a bunch of Christians saying it like, bad things happen in your life because you must not be a good Christian.
Right.
You must have some secret sin and you must be doing it. It's like, I guess I am really that bad. Like, I'm that evil. I guess like, punish me, God. Like, right. Because it's like, no, like God allows punishment, like bad things to happen. He says he disciplines those he loves. There are things in our hearts that we have to abandon that are not good, we're still depending on our strength. But the reason he does it is because he loves us. So anytime that anything comes into my life that is negative or that I don't enjoy, I just have to reframe it and say, wait, this is not meant to destroy me. This is actually meant for my good. This gets really weird. When we talk about major pastors that have major failures, who then profess still to be Christians, right? And you're seeing this destruction that they've caused in thousands of people sometimes, from the lives that they lived, the secrets that came out, and the destruction that they created. And they're maybe repentant, and I don't know their hearts. So I say, let's say they repented. But it gets really interesting to say, like, man, like, God allowed you to be exposed in such a big way for your good. That sucks to say, doesn't it? Like, but it's like, but if God loves you, he's saving you. So eternity from now, you look back in that moment, if you're that pastor, and going like, so glad he happened. In the moment, it was hell. In the moment, I wish it was different. I wish I did not do it. I wish I didn't have to go through it. But God saved me. Like, I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like, it's like, there's this deep thing of like, if you are secure in Christ's work for you, one, we should kill sin whenever we can. I'm not saying like, live hiddenly, like, no, kill sin as much as you can. But if there's some sin in your life that gets exposed, you just have to go like, God is doing it for my good.
Right.
Because he loves me. And he wants me to attain everything he has for me. And I'm stealing from what he intends to do with me every time I remain hidden. Every time I remain stuck or whatever. So it's a really interesting dynamic. Like, oh man, everything in my life is happening, including my enemies. All the things that have happened to me, all the injustices, all the negative comments that somebody said, like the things that people did against me that were purposely done, like all that God allowed to shape me into who He desires me to be.
Yeah, and I actually heard this past weekend I was at Eastlake Church's Tijuana campus, which is really such a, whenever I get the chance to go down to TJ, it's super fun, and it's also
Tacos.
Tacos, and it's a trip. It's super cool. But
They're great people.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so, I was blessed to go down there and serve with them. But I the message that they were talking about was on Jonah. And what you're saying, was super interesting. That a point that was brought up was, God sent a storm in Jonah's life to save him because he was running, and God wanted to bring him back. God wanted to turn him around. And so, the idea of that is like, it's so true. Even for like Habakkuk, when he was lamenting, complaining to God, like, why are these things still happening to me? Why are these things like happening around me? You're like, why are you allowing evil around me? And God's response was like, no, I'm here to like, I'm doing there's these things I'm doing because I love you, because I want to save you, because I want you to flourish. And it's something that I really do believe that we can't understand until we get past it. So you get past that storm, or you climb over that mountain, and you're like, you look back and you're like, wow. I actually, I am grateful for that season because how much I've grown, what I've experienced, what I believe now, and how I view God now. Of like, man, He really does know way, like He knows what's better for me than what I think is good for me. He knows what's good for me, and He knows what He needs to do for me to flourish, and what I think I need to do to flourish, or the avenues or routes I need to take probably aren't the best, because a lot of the times, sometimes we take routes that are away from God because, that's what we think is best, and we don't actually turn to God and say, hey, where do I need to go? What do I need to do in the season? And so, going back to Habakkuk too, like, he was complaining and lamenting to God, and like really it was another was a testimony of like, man, God just wants, like, even when we have conversation with God, like God just wants us to have a conversation with Him. It doesn't need to be formal. It doesn't need to be written down or scripted. Like sometimes it really is just like, God, why are these things happening, and why aren't you answering me? Like we said in our podcast last week, like one of it wasn't just like, oh God, hear my cry. It was also like, no, why aren't you answering my cry? Like, why don't I see you in the middle of my storm, or what is happening right now? Which takes me to Habakkuk 2:2, which was really the response to the word that God put on my heart, which was, it is coming, and really has to focus on God's timing, which is God's timing is so perfect. Like He knows exactly what you need, and He knows when you need it. And so I'll read for us Habakkuk 2:2, which, like I said, is one of like my life verses. A great reminder for me in every waiting season that I experience. And it says here, then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. And being reassured time and time again in this verse too, it will not prove false. Even though it linger, wait for it, because it will come. It will certainly come. It will not delay. And really, the promises that God has for us, and the desire and the purpose He has for us, like it will not prove false. Like it will come, but God knows when it should be, when the best time is. Because even I think now, if the things that God desired for me I took on now, I would probably squander it. Because God wants to take me head first. He wants me to know things.
Or more than squander, you might not be ready for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I said, what do I do with this?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, because I didn't learn what I need to learn yet. I didn't understand what I need to understand yet. I didn't have a deep enough relationship with God to actually understand maybe what it is, the directions He wants me to take with certain things.
Or you haven't even deepened yourself in the skills you need.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we'll get into this in the question with some of the things that I do, but one of them is like it's simply like sometimes we're waiting for God to give us the promise. When we talked about last week, I said He said, I've given you everything.
Yeah.
Like you want me to spoon feed you,
right?
But I give you every skill you need to go get the spoon and feed yourself.
Yeah.
Like and that's one of the things we're supposed to do in a waiting season. It's not like, okay, God, you say, here's where you're leading us. Here's what you're gonna do. Here's what you promised. What you expect from me is that I'm going to invest all my skills right now in becoming that person. If you're not expecting me to be sitting down for you to do the work.
Yeah.
You're expecting me for me to move forward and walk.
Yeah.
And that's hard sometimes in a season of waiting. So that's one of the things that I do, but I didn't want to get into. But,
I'll have some questions for you guys, that you can answer. But yeah, it even relates to like the launching of our church. I did have a conversation with Tony. He's the worship pastor down at the Tijuana campus. Shout out to him.
Great guy.
He's fantastic. He's so loving and caring and humble. And so, he asked me to go serve with him. So I was like, man, yeah, of course. And so I really had a great time. And so shout out to Tony. If you're listening to this, really love you. So grateful for you. But we had a conversation because, we were talking about, relation to the message that we heard and whatnot. And he was asking me questions about what I'm experiencing and, with the launch of a church. And, part of the conversation was like, man, really we could, like you said, the work is so important, and God loves when we begin to work and we begin the work. And we could choose to just be like, hey, all right, God, like you said, we're waiting for him to spoon feed us, when I don't think that God is, interested in doing that. God does not want to spoon feed us. He does not want to drag us to what he desires for us. So we could choose, as we launched this church, like we could have chosen at the beginning months ago when we had a conversation about it, and said, all right, well, we'll just see what God does. We'll just wait and we'll continue to meet each week and just like talk about them, like simple things, and just decide to just like sit and wait. But I don't, that's not what God wants us to do. In seasons of waiting, really the action step we should take is to pursue, like you said, the skills or the things that God's given us in order to, to walk towards and to be able to be given the promise. And that's why, we started doing podcasts and we started doing content and we started doing services. Even though the church hasn't even launched, we're like, man, like what can we do now while we wait in the season for when we launch the church? And so,
and it's only going to making us better.
Exactly.
Like when we launch a church, we have figured out some of our likes, dislikes. We have fine-tuned certain areas. We figure out how Armando preaches.
Yeah.
Right?
How the worship is.
Yeah.
And
like
prayer
we're not doing it just as we're lunching.
Right. Yeah.
Which gives us an opportunity to gel together as a team.
Yeah.
Even in a deeper way of understanding who we are, so that we could honor God by being all that he's called us to be.
Yeah. And I think I've seen us grow so much too already. And like I said, with the conversation I had with Tony, I was like, man, like if we did wait till like March or, whenever we launch in 2023, when our desired, launch time is, like, if we just launch then, we'd probably have a harder time, because it's like then at that time we'd be figuring out what we're figuring out now. So we're already like setting ourselves up for success, and we're also in the middle of like doing these things, just growing so much, and like you said, gelling. And so it's really like it is a testimony to what is best to do, in seasons of waiting, and what's the good route to take in the avenue. And so, which does lead me to like the questions that I brought up last week. Which were like, what has your guys', and I'll even ask myself this question, what is our response been to God in seasons of waiting, or, in past seasons, what has seasons of waiting look like for you? Because it'll look different for all of us. And, sometimes the truth is my response to God in seasons of waiting probably has reflected exactly what like Habakkuk's response to God was too. It's just like, man, God, like, why aren't you like, I'm crying out to you, I've said, for myself, the journey I've taken, I left my job that I was at previously, which I felt was like, I was safe, I was secure, financially, like that's like, it was like, I wouldn't say, super stable, but it was financial income. I didn't have to feel like any fear of like, well, where's my check coming from? But God said otherwise, and was like, hey, I have something for you, which is super interesting too, how God like takes us into new seasons. The way that God did it for me was like, hey, I have something for you that I want to show you, but God didn't show me it yet until I actually like took the action step of like, all right, I need to leave my job because I want to go see what God has for me, which is so interesting. Which like like God is so like good, and his desire for you is always good, and
he doesn't work the way we want him to.
Exactly. So
he's a person, right?
Yeah.
Like persons act different. We act different, and he has reasons why he doesn't. Like,
exactly.
If he has to tell us why we must do everything, like what he's asking us, we're never going to be people who learn to trust him for who he is.
Yep.
It's the same thing like with little kids. I learned this from Tim Keller. In one of the examples he gave, he's like, like when your kids are growing up, there's certain things you just tell them, don't do it. And they ask, why? Why? You go, because
Right.
I told you so.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
don't understand what would happen if you put your hand to the fire. So I tell you to stay away from the stove, and you're like, why? It's like, because you'll get burned. But why? It's like, you don't understand what happens if you get burned, so just stay away from it.
Yeah.
It's like your brain can comprehend it. So it's the same thing with us. Like, you just have to trust God. You just have to be like, okay, God, I don't need to know. I just need to know that you've called me.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
I don't need to know how it works out. I don't need to know how it might happen. I want to.
Right.
Everything in me desires to, but I should just trust you.
Right.
That's the most important thing. Here's the crazy part. I think it's Erwin McManus that said this statement, and it just stuck with me. He said, one of the most spiritual things you could do in your life is make choices. Making choices is a spiritual discipline. And it's one of the most spiritual things you get to do as a Christian. Because we're all called to make choices.
Yeah.
And we don't know the end results.
Right.
But we're supposed to make them anyway.
Yeah.
So this is why we weigh them out. This is why we test them. This is why we learn. This is why we try. We're making choices. That's part of the discipleship.
Yeah. And, the truth is, like you said, we don't know what the end looks like, but I do believe also just in like enjoying the process. I know like we've said that before, like let's like enjoy the journey, like enjoy the process, even if our feelings, aren't what we desired them to be, because we've talked about it before. Don't let your feelings override your purpose. Because once we get past, the season, maybe, that waiting season, and you see the other side of it, you see the harvest of it, like we'll look back and be like, praise God, I've grown, I've become better in these areas, these skills. I've actually because of the season of waiting, when I did pursue the skills, like you said, that, God's given me, now I'm actually more proficient in these skills. And now I feel like, we see the good intentions that God had for us. We just can't see it now. And so that could be in a season, like I said, the question I had for you guys was like, well, what has seasons of waiting looked like? Or, what has your response to God been in seasons of waiting? And so, I don't know if you guys have any.
Yeah, Nate left us on a cliffhanger last week, if you remember. He's like, I've responded in all kinds of ways, and I've done all kinds of things. And I was like, okay, Nate, you're going to have to explain this. How have you responded, and in which ways have you acted, Nate?
I think it's like the quintessential desert reaction that you see in the Bible, especially in Exodus. Like what I meant by I've responded in every way possible is I've literally there have been days where in a season of waiting where I'm motivated to do more. I'm motivated to go above and beyond. Like I'll read a bunch of books. I'll read the Bible for many hours. And then there's days where it's I doubt, and I'm like, God, it's probably not coming soon. So it's I'm just going to take a day off. And so it's just a constant roller coaster of, God, you said that this would happen, but it's been months, it's been years. So it's what's the difference if I choose not to spend time with you today? And then maturing and becoming who I am now and seeing it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. And learning about God's timing and all that stuff. It's okay, well, I wanted whatever it was to happen 10 years ago, but I obviously wouldn't have been ready. And I probably still am not ready now, but it's just the idea that
You're more ready now than you were
I'm more
before.
ready now than I was before, and that's all that that's the point that God's trying to prove. But it's interesting how we talk about God's timing, and God's timing is perfect, but it's also interesting how we can also delay that.
Yep.
And so that's something I think that plays a big part in my response to the question is what do I do in waiting periods? I delay, and it's whether it's subconsciously or sometimes premeditated. This heat wave hasn't been nice to my energy levels. So some days I'm just I'll whip out the devotional. I'll read a book, and then I'm overheating, and I'm just I'll pray later. I'll do this later. As a human, we go up and down, But other than that, I think looking back on my many other seasons of waiting that I've gone through in my life, I can say that I can like confidently say that I've delayed my calling, and it's so interesting to say that because I feel like I've delayed my calling, but it's also still God's perfect timing. And something I hear from like my parents or other spiritual mentors that I have, it's always like, if only I had come to Christ sooner. And it's so interesting because it's true. Like you want, in retrospect, in hindsight, you're like, I wish I got on the wagon earlier so I could have more time. And then it's funny, I find myself saying that now too. Like, if only I was serious about my faith, like earlier.
Yeah.
And I always made fun of them for that. I was like,
What does that even mean?
what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're where God wants you. Like, it's God's timing. But then I'm like, now that I'm in a probably the biggest waiting season of my life right now, planning this church with you guys, I'm starting to understand that statement more and more, and it's part of what motivates me. I don't want to be the type of person 6 months from now saying that I wish I did that earlier. So it's like, what's the remedy for that? Just do what you have to do now. And coming from someone who's very lazy, like just habitually,
We could all be.
it's tough. It's not what I want to hear. Like, I don't want to have to wake up and plan my day and stick to a schedule, because I'm someone who I feel like has been dragged along by God for like the majority of my early life. And I think that's a testament to like my parents' faithfulness to God, is that I was feeling the blessing from their faithfulness for so long. But at some point, God was saying, you need to make it your own, or you need to get off the train. And it was just, there was grace, but it really came down to, am I really going to choose God now, or is God just something in my mind that I'll remember to include in my life every now and then? And I saw what that led to. I saw the fruits of my own labor, and like what I've probably said to you guys before. I don't know if this has been recorded or not, but I can always say, I say how I can only get myself so far. Like, I could get a job, I could build my life. Well, I could build my own life. I hate that song. Sorry. I could build my own life.
It's a great song.
It's it's a great song. Just
Until you play it
until you're the one playing it like 50,000 times. Yeah. I could build up my own kingdom, and I could build up my own life and my own stronghold.
By the way, that was like something only worship people would do.
Oh yeah.
You said line like build my life, and you completely think of a song.
Yeah.
I know.
But yeah, I could do my life my way, and then I think of this like how I was in school, where I just do school, and then when a test or an exam's coming, then I panic pray and be like, God, like God, please, if you help me with pass this, then I'll surrender to you. And then I always failed. So it was just
reason to not surrender.
Right. And then but that was really just kind of an echo of my life in every aspect. It was God, and maybe this is how many people are also, but it's I'll say I used to only think of God when I really, really needed him, and then when everything was cool and I could relax, and it was summer break from school or whatever, then I was just like, hey God, what's up? Like, I'll see you next semester. And that's how that carried on into my adult life, and that's something I'm having to unlearn. Is God's not there to drag me along anymore. He's there waiting for me, but it's my choice whether or not to follow him. And so that's why I say I've chosen probably every possible choice when it comes to a season of waiting. And it still takes some unlearning to beat some of these habits into the ground and choose God. There's some days where I still tend to not choose God. I think my way or whatever will be better, but maturing and falling in love with Christ is making those decisions, like you said, making choices that God really wants what's best for you, and he knows what's best for you. So yeah, I think,
which I think too, in season, because we both, Nathan and I both left our old church, at around the same time, and so he was working there too, in on a different department. But I think there's I relate some of my response to waiting seasons is there's the Abraham and Sarah, the child, the Isaac, way of waiting season, or because we talked about it too last week, the Israelites out of Egypt response. First being the Abraham and Sarah, God told them that they would bear their child Isaac. They didn't know his name at the time, but they would bear a child at their age, and God promised them that. And their response was no, we're too old. How can that even be possible? Which again, God exceeding what's actually possible, what we think is possible. But what Abraham did was he tried to not delay he tried to
actualize the promise.
Which is a response that I think about a season that me and Nathan had, where we were working on our own music, and we tried to do the same thing. You try to control everything, and you're like, man, okay, so God has promised us success in this area, and we were like, all right, cool, so how do we do that? And it was just kind of all right, let's just do it then. Let's control this entire scenario so that we can experience the promise. And so, Abraham and Sarah had conversed, and they were like, oh, just go have a child with, because Sarah was like, I'm too old to bear a child. So he's like, have a child with Hagar. Yeah. So he did, and God was like, man, what are you doing? I promised you a child, and I still did, was I'll still give you this child from Sarah, which is God is so God is so faithful to his promises, and so gracious to us. And so I think we've experienced that kind of waiting season of trying to expedite the process and be all right, let's get the promise how we think it's best. We fit the promise into our scenario, when instead of all right, God, how can we serve now, and how can we walk down this avenue and this journey in order to obtain the promise the way you intend it to be. And then there's also the Israelites out of Egypt, where, we talked about it last week, how the Israelites actually, even though they were in the desert for 40 years prior to going to the land that God promised them, I don't think, like I said last week, I don't think they thought they would be in the desert for 40 years, but it's also because of what they did to be in the desert for 40 years. And so, which is, I think I relate, to your experience in waiting seasons as well, where man, I've been all right, God, I've heard the promise. I've obtained it. I'm ready to pursue it. But instead, my response is okay, I'm ready, to be spoon fed. All right, God, take me there. I'm
waiting.
Ready. Yeah, I'm waiting. And God's
come on, God.
Right. Yeah. And so, it really, those seasons are tough, but again, and then trying to understand God, how and his timing is so perfect, even in the midst of all that. But I also think too, which was you brought up an interesting point as well. I'm just jumping around, all these thoughts flowing out now, but I'm just jumping around. I don't, we think about how God, I think about in my seasons, of waiting, and how I think that God wants to take me head first in many ways, to just be help me understand, help me to see how, I can hold this promise and be ready for it. And to be successful in it, and not to squander it, or not to, destroy it, or, not be ready for it, and to run away. But I also think sometimes I don't think we'll ever be ready, because I don't think even relating to the Moses, to go deliver the Israelites out of Egypt. I don't think Moses was ready.
Right.
But God still called him to go do that. But
and even if he didn't feel ready.
Yeah.
So right, Exodus 4, maybe it is. He tells God I stuttered. Send somebody else. That's
I responded that way.
You were in the courts of Egypt, of the Pharaoh. You were trained in their ways of speaking, in their ways. You know how to address them. You know how to appeal to them. You know their rhetoric. You know it. You've been in there. So even if he was ready, he was still can I get out of this one?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've responded that way too. And so, but the to see how good God is. Like God was like, I'll be with you. Like, and even then God did send someone else to be the voice of Moses, and which is like God always, like God is so gracious.
Crazy to think, like God compromised.
Yeah, that's
Right.
To think, the kind of God we serve, which shout out to our
Not morally. Let's make sure we, God did not compromise morally. He didn't compromise his holiness or any of that sort. I don't want anyone to misunderstand. Oh, God's gonna compromise. So could it be like whatever? And then God's gonna no. Like he made a compromise with Moses to carry out his purposes and plan.
Mm-hmm. Which, man, shout out to the series we have coming up, Behold Your God, which like it's just like exploring like, man, the God we serve is so big and powerful. And many times it really just can be, especially in seasons of waiting for myself, like it can be so hard to understand what it is that God is doing. But then again, it's just like sacrificing, myself and being like, all right, God, like I'm here to, help me to understand, help me to see that what it is, even if I can't see, whether the season of waiting lasts 10 years or if it lasts 10 months or 10 days, like, still, even if I can't actually see the end of it, like just help me to understand. I think that's a lot of times my prayer, instead of, responding of like, man, God, I hate this. Like, just get me out of this. I'm so sick of it. But then a lot of times my response is out of, what I'm actually experiencing and actually what I'm doing. I'm not actually doing anything. Like, so I'm not actually taking steps forward to actually pursue, the promise. I'm just sitting there. And then of course my response is like, God, why aren't you doing anything? And God's like turning to me, why aren't you doing anything? And so, wrestling with God is such an interesting thing. But what is your, your experience? I know you have a lot of thoughts on it too.
Before I share, just from what Nate and you were saying, one of the hardest things for us to do as we grow up is to make faith our own. Right? Nate was saying like, man, I was like riding my parents' waves.
That's right.
And the other thing that becomes really hard to do, like all the guys listening to me and all the gals as well, but I'm going to talk straight to the guys because I'm a dude. So it's a little easier to talk to the guys. Like, you are responsible for your life. Nobody else is responsible for your life. And it's understanding that deep weight of like, oh my, like my childish ways are thinking like, if I had good parents, like I did, Nate, you did, you did too, Casey. We were blessed with good parents. Yeah. Sometimes we depend on them because they've been such a blessing on us. Then it's hard for us to understand and cross the line of like, I'm responsible for my own life. Yep. Like for me, that realization came deeply when I was a high school senior and I was about to graduate. And I was 17. I graduated at 17. Hey, September babies or whatever. And I'm literally out of nowhere. I was looking at all my friends. I was like, man, I'm not going to see these guys anymore. Like we all said we're going to see each other, but we know we're going in different ways. Like like I'm not going to my 10-year reunion or my 20-year reunion. So I don't know when I ever see you again. Yeah. And it dawned on me like, man, my parents have sacrificed so much for me out of nowhere. Like the week of graduation, I'm just thinking of going, and now I'm on my own. Even though I wasn't, right? I was still gonna live with my parents. Yeah. They still were providing me a car. I was like, wow. Like when I turned 18, my dad and mom don't have to feed me anymore. And it was like a weird realization. And of course, someone's listening to this going like, bro, that was my life since I was like 12. I had to fetch on my own. My dad left my mom, or I was abandoned, or whatever. So I've been on my own. And for some of us, like it just gets harder depending on our upbringing of realizing like I'm responsible for my own life. Yeah. And that's a hard, heavy burden, but it is a burden of living. It is a burden of actually living to be who you are called to be. And the whole aspect of making faith your own reminded me of this poem that I once heard. So I was just looking up when you were saying it because it made me think of it. So I'm going to read it. I haven't read it, so I was kind of trying to eye it since in the moment. Oh, nice. But it goes, one night I had a wondrous dream. One set of footprints there was seen, the footprints of my precious Lord, but mine were not along the shore. But then some stranger prints appeared, and I asked the Lord, what have we here? Those prints are large and round and neat, but Lord, they're too big for feet. My child, he said in somber tones, for miles I carried you alone. I challenged you to walk in faith, but you refused and made me wait. You disobeyed, you would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired, I got fed up, and there I dropped you on your butt. Because in life, there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb. one must rise and take a stand, or leave their butt prints in the sand.
Yeah.
Which reminded me of what you said, Nate, of like, there comes a time where like we can't ride our parents' coattails of their faith anymore.
Right,
and God
right.
say like, I made you and I purpose you to come live. And if you refuse to see how I've been carrying you all of this time, how I've been sustaining you and protecting you, and how I will continue to do that, then I need you to like be dropped and experience the hardships of life until you realize that you have a calling to fulfill.
Yeah.
And that your potential will be squandered as long as you refuse to step into it. And it's fear, it's full of fear. Like it's not something like,
Right.
it's one of those things where you have to step into it going like, okay, God, I don't know what this means. And I don't know what it looks like. But what you're calling me is to trust.
Yeah.
And sometimes I could see the horizon and I could see the background really far away and it's not quite clear. So I know what you're calling me to, and I can kind of see it from far away, but I really only see what's in front of me right now.
Yeah.
And you're asking me to move with what is in front of me.
Yeah.
And that's hard. Like for all of us. Let's be honest, because that takes like, okay, now we're doing the Abraham journey.
Yeah.
Step out into the unknown. Let's go out by faith with this promise that you're going to be a nation,
Yeah.
that I will give you a baby, and you have nothing
Yeah.
except the people that travel with you, which is some of your family members and some of the servants, and you have your sheep and goats and stuff. But like besides that, you got no baby. But you're going to be a nation.
Right.
You're going to have a promised child, and it's going to come through your old wife. It's like
Yeah.
a land that you've never been to, by the way.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go walk the land that you've never been to. You're gonna see it because it's not yours yet.
Yeah.
It's gonna take some time
Yeah.
before you get it.
That's good too. Yeah.
So you're gonna go see it. So it's that aspect of like we step by faith as we make faith our own, and we're going like, okay, this is why it's so important that we know who Christ is and what God has done through Him, so that we ground ourselves.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to be like offensive if it was offensive, like saying like, like we are responsible for our own life, because that's a strong statement.
Yeah.
But sometimes we need to hear that.
Yeah.
Miles Monroe, and I might have shared this quote or not, he was a pastor. He died on an airplane with his family as they were flying back from something. But he was like a spiritual pastor, speaker. And he has this quote. I only know it because I wrote it in my new book that I'm writing. Shout out to my book that's not created, but will be created.
Let's go. Yeah.
And he said, the wealthiest place in the planet is not the gold mines in South America. It's neither the diamond fields in South Africa. It's not the oil fields of Texas. It's not the banks in the world. The wealthiest place in the world is down the street. It's a cemetery where all of this potential remained buried and died. There lies masterpieces that were never created, books that were never formed, businesses that were supposed to transform the world, church ministries that were never founded. There lies all of these things that would have blessed the world. And that's kind of what I'm trying to say with that. Like, we are to be responsible for our own faith. Like he go on to say, like, as long as you're breathing, there's potential. And we know that, right? Like, God sustains us because He has a purpose for our life. We know that. He goes like, as long as you're breathing, you're pregnant with potential. But you need to start acting it out. And you need to start believing and moving forward in actions.
Yeah.
It's a powerful quote. So Nate, it looked like you have heard it before.
You told us
Oh,
last
I
week.
did say it. I did say it. Oh, well. You get a double doses.
That was good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's it's a super good. So how have I reacted in seasons of waiting? Well, I freak out. That's the first thing I most likely do, especially the season of waiting has come because of something that's out of my control. Like what happened, my last two organizations that I was a part of were things that were happening outside of my control. There was nothing I could do about it. So I was like, okay, God, what are you doing? Like, you brought us. You said you were doing this, and now all these things are happening that are outside of my control. I know where we're headed. I know that planting a church is the direction we've been going for like the past 5-6 years. But is this really the way you want to do it? In my mind, it was going to be like this grandiose thing that just naturally builds to it. But you're doing it in this crazy way. So when we were praying to move back to San Diego and plant the church, I was praying. I was in the basement of our home in Maryland, and I came upstairs and I was showing, hey, I think this is what we need to do. I feel like this is the time. Like, we've been waiting and praying for the right time, but I feel like God is saying this is the time. So I'm going to go pray for the people now that I think we should come. And I mentioned to you guys that I was praying for you guys. And there's other people that have been praying as well and believing that God's going to stir their hearts in the right timing. But out of nowhere, in one of those days, I came from upstairs completely freaking out, telling Shirley, like, what am I doing? What's wrong with me? Maybe I should just go back to school right now and get get a certificate on graphic designing or computer engineer or some sort that I could get to a job because I have a family. And how am I going to provide for my family? I was having a major freak out about provision because what dawned on me was that for the first time in my life, if I go do this, I have no backup plan. And that felt scary. Yeah. Because up to this point, I had a backup plan. When I was at one of my previous organizations, I knew I was going to move. I knew I was going to leave it. When I was at another organization, I knew that it was only a season because we were going to plant a church eventually. So I knew that it was temporary stuff. So I always had a backup plan. Then all of a sudden you come do what God's calling you to do, and you realize it's all or nothing. And you can't make it successful, Armando. It depends on God to open all the doors. So I freak out. It's normally one of the things that I do. But my freakouts always lead me to prayer because my freakouts always have to do about a certain belief in me that God is showing to me that shows I don't believe you and I don't trust you. I don't believe you if you got me. I don't believe you're going to make this happen for us. I have to, because if I don't do it, nobody else will. So for me, it's I freak out and I go pray and then I go say, okay, God, what are you showing me about my heart and how I'm responding? And what are you trying to tell me about that? And for me, one of them was having to seek control. Like literally having to seek control. The other thing is I never stop growing. Like I make it a point that I'm going to continue to grow. If I don't know what the season looks like as I'm waiting, I know what I can do in the season. I can grow myself and I can prepare myself and I could dig down and deepen myself. So when I said, I'm going to have church planting, so I'm going to continue to deepen my theology. I'm going to continue to deepen my leadership. I'm going to, like the resources that I have available to me that I've already purchased, I'm going to completely invest in them because I want to grow myself in order to grow other people. And this is the statement that we shared last week. Opportunities flow to those who grow, which is from Jeff Henderson, because I never quoted him last week. I give him credit where credit's due. But it's that aspect of like, okay, if I, in a waiting season, if it is meant to be preparation, then the most obedient thing I can do is grow, prepare. If I know what I'm called to, but I don't see it happening, at least I could prepare for the calling. So that when it comes here, it's ready. I think I've shared this quote before with you guys. No, it's not a quote. This story before with you guys. I'm not 100% sure if I shared this on the podcast because I normally don't like sharing this stuff about my private family life. But one of my cousins is a producer, and we've talked about this. And he's producing for big name people when it comes to the reggaeton world, which is a blessing. But one of the things that we talked personally when I shared with you guys about this was his story of how it happened. And it's like for years, for over a decade, he was toiling, and nobody was paying attention to him. He was playing in the local festivals. He was had his own groups. He was writing songs, and nothing was happening. My cousin was doing this since he was a little kid. Like my earliest memories of him is him trying to learn instruments and trying to learn how to record because that's all that he wanted to do. Out of nowhere, he gets a phone call and says, "I need you to go and come to San Juan." He's in the west coast of Puerto Rico, 3.5 hours away. And the guy tells him, "I need you to get here as soon as you can." He's like, "Why?" I can't tell you why. Just come here and bring your tracks. So he said, I didn't have a car in the moment. So I literally called my friend and I said, can I borrow your car? Like, I need to get to San Juan. He's like, sure, I'll lend you my car. So he borrowed a car, made it there. When he got to the studio, it was one of the biggest stars of reggaeton. Mm-hmm. And they said, we need a track. So he opened up. He said, I got a track for you. Showed him a track. They're like, oh, that's legit. I love that. Mm-hmm. They used his track and then they went, do you have more tracks? Mm-hmm. And he's like, I have a whole hard drive of tracks.
Yep.
So from that moment on, he started getting tracks where he's producing. And now he's got some of the, like I said, some of the most well-known artists are using and he's producing for.
Yep.
All because he was in the season of waiting, preparing for what was to come. Yeah. He wasn't waiting for the opportunity. And he said it in an interview. Like he said, like, if I would have waited for the opportunity to arrive, I never would have been ready. Because it would have been like, you have a track. And I was like, I could create one right now. It's like, I don't need you to create one right now. We're recording. Yeah. Like, we're in the process of like, these two got limited time. Yeah. I called you because you're a friend. Yeah. Like, show up. Yeah. So it's the same thing with us. Like, in our season of waiting, we should invest in our growth.
That's right.
In the areas that we feel called, that we feel skilled in, and that we feel that we can make the most impact. Yeah. And the other one is just keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Like, don't sit and wait. Like, we talked about this already. Like, sometimes we want God to, like, we have to keep moving forward. Yep. We're growing and we're moving forward. We're making choices, which is a very spiritual practice. I remember hearing a message from someone, and I was so angry at his message because it had to do with a season of waiting. And it was saying, like, you know, when God's not answering your prayers or, like, when things are hard, just keep moving. And I was like, you don't know my situation. I was cursing him out mentally. Yeah. Like, cursing him out. Like, I was so angry. Yeah. At the same time, I listened to a message from Tim Keller that's called Your Will, semicolon, God's Will. So I was listening to this Tim Keller message prior to this, saying how his story about how he moved to New York and planted a church, and everyone was telling him not to do it, that churches die in New York, that he had a safe and secure job in Pennsylvania as a professor. He had a home. Why are you going to move to New York where you don't have a church, you don't have a job, and churches die? In like, yeah. And he said, he's like, you know how I knew if it was going to be God's will? He's like, if it worked out. Yeah. And you know how I knew if it was going to be God's will? If it didn't work out. It's like, so I committed and I rented an apartment for 3 years. And it was like, beep, beep, explicit. Yeah. Like, I was so angry. Like, so these two messages are hitting me in the same spot. Yeah. And I knew it was God trying to tell me, like, you keep thinking that if I call you to something, it's just gonna happen. It isn't. You gotta move forward and you gotta act and you gotta prepare and you gotta keep walking forward and you gotta trust me. And even when it doesn't look like it, you gotta keep walking forward. Move, keep going. Yeah. And that was really hard to hear. Yeah. Like, being honest with you, I had to listen to that Tim Keller message 3 times. Second time, I cursed a little less. And third time, I didn't curse at all. Yeah. Because I knew that it was God trying to work in my heart. Because it's hard to put the hell that I was going through personally with work at the time. So it's hard to, like, quantize, like, everything that was happening to me while listening to this message is going like, well, God, I've been doing everything that's on my end. That's right. Like, but there's things out of my control and I can't do anything about the evil that they're doing to me and the wrong. And, like, I'm trying my best here, God. Yeah. Like, so grow, keep moving forward, and freak out and pray. Like, when you do freak out, just pray. Like, know that the freak out, it's about beliefs in your hearts that God wants you to see. He needs you to see them. He wants you to see them so that he could deal with them.
Yeah. And, you know, I think it's, you know, that testimony is so encouraging too, because, you know, we're not perfect. And, you know, like I said, you know, even these conversations, we're still learning as we grow too. Yeah. As we do have these conversations, we're still learning and growing. And, you know, sometimes I do think that people, you know, think that pastors or, you know, worship leaders or people who are leaders of the church always have the perfect lives, and, you know, they don't experience, you know, the things that they're experiencing. And it's just not true. Like you said, you've experienced freak out and you've experienced fear, and it just depends on how you respond to that. And I do think you brought up a super good point that something that I've taken to heart and I've had to experience too is like when we say yes to the calling that God has for us, and he'll everyone has a calling, and you'll receive it in whatever way God thinks fits best for you. But when you receive that calling, or you're like, all right, I know where I need to, God said it's time to go, it's time to do this. Sometimes I say yes to God, but I also have a plan B and C, which is something I've heard from Mike Todd. He's preached about, and you said it well yourself too. Like when God gives us a calling, like plan A is that's it. That's all we got. Like, and that's God's intention too. He's like, this is for you. Like, I want you to just do this. And my plan B and C sometimes I'll think will be like, oh, maybe this like God ordained plan B and C. So like maybe, God's in the middle of those things too. And those are just backup, and, God's prepared a backup for me. I don't think that's true at all. God's plan for me, like it's plan A. The B and C is what I created for myself because I didn't trust God. I wasn't sure that what God intended for me, what his intentions are for me, may not like fall through. And so, that does also have to go, ties to limiting beliefs and me thinking that what's actually possible for me, like probably, what I think is possible for me, usually God always like exceeds, because you can read in scripture, with anything God is possible. With the Lord, anything is possible. And so, that's why I created my plan B and C's. But, even planning this church has really helped me eliminate like that idea. Like we've talked about it before, like we burn the ships, like we're here, we're doing this, like God's called us to do this. And so we're saying yes, even though, times my feelings, it doesn't feel so good, or, things aren't panning out the way I expected them to be. But this is obviously God has a plan, and it's all about enjoying the process and enjoying the journey, and just like pursuing it, and just being like, all right, this is like God has a plan, and He has a way of doing it, and so I'm just like, all right, I'm open to this, God, even though I don't feel good. I always tell myself this, like my feelings may not feel good. My emotions may be not on the right track, but like I don't want to let my feelings override my purpose, or my emotions override my purpose. Like there's a reasons to this. Like we said it previously in the podcast, like we may not understand what God is doing until we actually get to the other side of the mountain or to the other side of the storm. And so super encouraging, your testimony to Seasons of Waiting, and it's really helped me, think about like what am I doing in my seasons of waiting, and how am I responding? But yeah,
and just to add to what you're saying too. This is also a season of testing, right? Luke 16:10 says, and this is the New Living Translation, but you've heard this before. If you're faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones.
Yep.
But if you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities.
Yeah.
So it's that aspect of like, what I've entrusted to you now, are you going to prove faithful in it so that I could entrust you with larger ones? Or are you not going to use it? Or you're going to be dishonest with it and not do your best? Because that means I cannot give you larger things.
Exactly.
So like even in the season of church planting, it's like we could have all these dreams, and we do, and we have these visions of things we want to do and how we want to impact our city locally, not only by being a blessing to the city and creating affordable housing, but we also want to establish a place where creatively we're impacting the media world in every way, shape, and form we can. From video, so if you're a videographer, we would love for you to join us, to music, to like art. Like we want to push those envelopes because we want to see people of faith stepping up to places of great importance and influencing the world forward.
Yeah.
But that calls us to be faithful in the little.
Yeah.
And the little is, how do you develop your leaders, Armando? How do you give them opportunities? How do you bring out the potential of Nate and Casey and everyone that joins the team in such a way that they grow to be everything that God has called them to be?
Yeah.
And that's the little part.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, here's what I see in you, here's what I see in you, and here's what you could do. And now run. And I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader, but I'm also going to be a prod at times to keep you going forward,
Yeah.
so that you don't squander everything that God has given you, because He doesn't want you to squander it.
Yeah.
And because by the end of our time together, however long it is, the rest of our lives, or however long the race, whatever God decides, I want you and I to both look back and say, man, we were faithful with everything God gave us,
Yeah.
and we did our very best for one another
Yeah.
as we honor God. So it's that aspect of like, wow, okay. And that's a convicting statement. Like, how am I being faithful in the little?
Yeah.
Like sometimes we just apply it to finances too. Like am I faithful in my finances? Like how is God going to entrust me more finances if I'm not generous already?
Right.
Like He blesses the generous. Well, I'm not generous. It's like, but God, come on, give me all the money in the world. It's like, I can't do that.
Right.
Be generous, because you're showing me I can entrust you.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's a hard statement though. Like,
Yeah.
how am I being faithful in what He's given me?
Yeah, and I think that's a good challenge, for you listening this week. Before we wrap up with final thoughts, but great challenge. I think good challenge for me too is like being faithful with the little, like me taking a perspective of things in my life and like what am I being faithful with? My time. Am I being faithful? With my finances. Being faithful with the skills and the talents that God's given me. Like even though to me it seems so little now, but it's like
With my leadership's knowledge, with the knowledge in general that He's given me.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, that you brought a great point that like you said, sometimes we just think about it in financial way, but like there's in all the ways being faithful, and so great challenge, and go back and I think Armando even has he brought up 3 great points in Seasons of Waiting and how to and what responding is like, and would say even like some of the best way to respond because really is praying and just being faithful to the Lord in those seasons, because they can be so tough because I know I've experienced it, and maybe if you're even experiencing it, like it can be so tough, it can be so hard, and
Curse me out like I cursed those two guys.
yeah,
You're fine.
do it, yeah. But
Give yourself permission to freak out. Sometimes we don't do that, right? We think we have to be so solid. I can't have a bad day. It's like, no, you freak out. John Maxwell has a rule. It's really hard to apply. He's like, when something bad happens, you have 24 hours to mourn it and then move on. When something great happens, you have 24 hours to celebrate it and then move on. Because life keeps moving on, and the only guarantee that tomorrow will be better is your growth today. So give yourself permission to freak out. Just don't stay in the freak out.
Yeah.
Like, put a time limit. Like, I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
God, I don't know what you're doing. I'm trusting you, but I don't know what this means. Look at what's happening. Look at blah, blah, blah. And then after that 24 hours over, come up with a game plan.
Yeah.
Be faithful in the little.
Yeah.
Move forward, grow, and execute it.
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. So, Nathan, you have final thoughts?
That was a pretty good closing thought.
Yeah, that's great.
Pretty
Great
solid,
close out.
actually.
Great challenge for all of us. And so,
Here's my last thought, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
'cause
go
that
ahead.
that was just an interjection. I literally wrote
Yeah,
a
go
last
ahead.
thought, which is
Yeah.
leverage your life, all of it, for the glory of God and the benefit of people. Like, no thing about your life is a mistake. You're not white, Casey, by accident. You're not Filipino by accident. I'm not Puerto Rican by accident.
Yep.
Everything in your lives, God wants to leverage for His glory. So we have to look at all of our lives and say, like, if He's called me to be faithful in the little, then what is the little that He's given me that I can leverage for His glory and the good of people, and then things that I enjoy too in the process.
Yeah.
Like, I leverage our Korean barbecue dinners as much as I can
yeah.
to make sure we have great conversations that deepen us.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I don't just want to go eat good food.
Right.
I want to grow together and have fun and build relationship. So like, try to leverage everything in your life
Yeah.
for the glory of God, for the good of people, and for your enjoyment too, if you can.
Yeah, that's so good. Amen to that. But yeah, we are so grateful for you listening. I really, I pray that this time and this conversation really has blessed you and impacted you. And like I said, challenged you. We want to help you grow into who God's calling you to be. And sometimes it can be so challenging to grow into what God's calling us to be, because there's things that we face that bring us, out of into uncomfortable situations, which a lot of times we don't like. We like to live, safe and comfortable. But God wants, and sometimes He's got to shake us up in order for us to walk into the promises and walk into what He's calling us to the calling he has in our lives and who he's calling us to be. And so we're so grateful for you listening, man. The support you guys have been giving us over the past, 10 weeks now that we've been doing this has really been incredible. We are so grateful. Shout out to all of you listening. We've shouted out so many people before.
Review
we'll
us.
Continue. That's something we did have a conversation prior to this. Go follow us on Spotify and also on Apple Podcasts. It really does help. And then also, submit some reviews. Not only does it help, the spread of the podcast, or but it also is just like it helps us. We want to know like maybe there's things we could be doing better. Maybe whatever it is. Maybe the intro song could be better, or conversations could be better. No, but
or how they're blessing you, so that way we could actually share that on the podcast too, and say here's who said so and so. Here's how they said they've been blessed. When we talked about that, it was actually funny. I was like, we have like 6 reviews that are 5 stars. Casey, he's like, yeah, one of them is mine. I was like, and another one is mine.
Yeah, I know.
So it's at least 4. And Nate's like, I'll do that later. I just hate my voice.
That's so funny. It's true. For the first episode we dropped, I just put a 5-star review because I was like, it's our podcast. So, but
no one knows. No one knows.
No one will even know. But we really do appreciate it. The support of you just listening already is enough. But we would ask that just leave reviews and follow us because it does help too. But we are so grateful for you listening. We just want to remind you of the next garden experience we're having, which is on September 22nd.
And then our prayer experience
25th
is on the 25th. And so 22nd at 6:30, doors open at 6. That's the garden experience on a Thursday night.
Title for the message as of right now, Knowledge Beyond Facts.
Knowledge Beyond Facts. Yeah, this will be our second.
Like, that's a weird title, dude.
That's crazy.
No, it's good. Knowledge Beyond Facts. That's intriguing. But this will be the second week. Yeah, second week of a Behold Your God series. And so really we invite you to come join us. It's a really incredible series. We're praying over Armando that God just gives him the knowledge and the wisdom of the series, that it first of all glorifies God, but just benefits and impacts us. And so we invite you, and then the prayer things that we have, we invite you to those as well. Those are in person. Those are separate from the 21 days of prayer we're doing. We're just doing 21 days of prayer just for this month. But at the end of every month, on Sundays at 4:30 p.m., we do gather together in person at the same location where our garden experience is hosted, and we just pray together. That's what those nights are focused on, is just praying. And so they're really an incredible time because, we do believe in the power of prayer and how essential it is to our relationship with God. And so we just love taking time to spend a whole night on just praying. And
the last one is 21 Days of Prayer on Instagram. It's happening right now, Monday through Friday at noon.
Yep.
Saturdays at 9, and Sundays at 4:30 p.m.
Yeah, and so make sure you follow us on Instagram at the Garden Experience SD, so you can stay up to date on information and also see us, pray with us when you have those times available to pray with us. But they'll also be posted so you can watch them later. But yeah, we are just so grateful for what God is doing in our lives, and we're praying for what God's doing in your life, that He would reveal Himself to you, and that you would just become more like what God's intended you for your life. And so, we cannot wait to see you guys at the Garden Experience.